Chapter 39. A Cute Couple. 1. Anastasia stared at me again in silent shock. She neither agreed nor did she refute my statement. She simply stared, her eyes roving up and down as she studied me like a puzzle she didn't know how to solve. "You're very weird." I simply grinned at her and continued to play with her hair. I wrapped more strands around my hand before I used it to pull her towards me. "Ow." I leaned my face against her and I whispered in her ear, "Let's be weird together. There are a lot of things I can show you, things that are a lot more exciting than just now. I doubt a peasant would know how to have a good time. What makes you think I want to play with you?" "You'd be surprised by what I know. Or maybe I should go to the Duchess." I made a sad face and forced out some tears. "And show her what you did to me." Her lip quivered. Anastasia was still a child, and she feared the consequences of her actions like most children. Just the thought of me running to her aunt made her scared. "Don't do that, and don't cry." She looked conflicted and patted me on the back in an attempt to comfort me. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call you a peasant. Let's definitely play together." "Great." I grinned. My tears dried up quickly. "Well then," I looked at Anastasia's green dress and I untied the large green bow around her waist and tied it around my neck, hiding the signs of her strangulation. "Ta-da! Now no one will know. That's only on the condition that you behave and have lots of fun with me." She nodded agreeably, still said, "I'm against this engagement. Since you're not snitching on me, I guess you're not that bad for a commoner. Sure, let's have fun together." He shook my hand. Her attitude was annoying, but she would probably grow out of that. I found myself feeling a bit hyper. I thought I would get bored while dealing with Anastasia, but that didn't seem to be the case. I thought Minho would be my only one, but now I had another. It was like I had become some sort of tamer. All these potential killers were falling out of the sky and into my lap, just waiting for me to polish them and bring out their demon. I was certain I could turn Anastasia into a thrilling accomplice. I might not be able to manipulate her in the same way as Minho, but I would make her addicted to me. Addicted, cruelty, and pain. Our mood after that was a lot calmer, and we ended up bonding a bit. She told me about every time she got angry and all the things she wanted to do, the people she disliked, from torture to pushing them off bridges. In turn, I told her about some of my own fantasy. "You know, when you were being rude to me earlier, I imagined grabbing a fork and stabbing you with it. I even plucked out your eyes and hacked at your brain." She stared at me stunned and then giggled. "What about now?" She leaned forward and opened her eyes wide. "Do you still want to pluck my eyes out?" Breathed and stroked her eyelid. "Yes." Her pretty eyes made me understand why other killers kept body parts for their collection. I never felt enough attachment to my victims to keep a souvenir, but I strangely wanted to keep Anastasia's eyes in a jewelry box by my bedside table. "What if I pluck out your eyes first?" she asked. "You can keep them." Anastasia burst out laughing. "I've never spoken about things like this before. You're so weird." I smiled at Anastasia and didn't say anything. She probably thought I was joking, but she would soon learn that I didn't make many jokes. We spoke for hours, and I found myself actually enjoying the conversation. I was able to say anything to Anastasia, even thoughts I couldn't tell Minho because he was still a bit sensitive and viewed me as an angel. Anastasia had a rather twisted sense of humor, and she also had worries that I understood. She explained how she lacked a lot of empathy for the people around her, and how she never really felt sad when she thought about her parents' death. She confessed how she secretly found it funny when I cried earlier, and that she only apologized because she thought she had to, and not because she generally cared. At that point, the adults returned to the room, all laughing and chatting, seeming a bit more energized than they had done a few hours before. They were loudly conversing until they saw us. The Grand Duchess's expression was comical, as her jaw went slack and her eyebrows raised at the sight of Anastasia and me sitting on the floor huddled together, her eyes becoming wider when she saw Anastasia's large green bow tied around my neck. "Whoa, am I seeing things? Is the little menace actually making friends?" Prince Boris said. Immediately his brother, Prince Michael, elbowed him in the ribs to shut him up. "This is wonderful, they're really getting along." Alexis shouted with joy. The Grand Duchess remained frozen for a few seconds, her brain seeming to buffer, but then her expression quickly went back to normal. She gave Anastasia an approving look and turned to Kang Sung. I was worried since Anastasia can be a bit difficult, but it seems like Ho is a great influence on her. She doesn't talk to other children, and she's been struggling with a few things. So this is a relief in many ways. Kang Sung grinned at me and gave me a small smile. He seemed drunk. Laughter and chatter continued until late into the night. In the evening, as we went to leave, Anastasia held on to the sleeve of my blazer. Ah, she doesn't want him to go, Alexis laughed. Now, Anastasia, you need to let him leave. You will be seeing your future husband tomorrow as well. She shook her head and the whole place burst into laughter. I turned and hugged her, making the adults hoot and whistle. I whispered, I'll show you something very fun tomorrow, don't worry, and I won't tell anyone about what you did. She grinned, pinched my arm harder while whispering, you better not, and she let go. The ride back was uneventful. When we arrived at the hotel, Kang Sung praised me for being a good boy and getting the princess on my side, and then Minho escorted me to my room. As Minho changed me and took off the bow, he shrieked in horror. What happened? I gave him an innocent look. Something very fun. Chapter 40. Cute Couple. 2. Cameras flash. A media circus followed us as Anastasia and I walked across the street, hand in hand. We were at the Golden Quartier, doing some shopping. Ever since our first meeting, Anastasia and I had been hanging out quite often. Sometimes we would enjoy concerts together, go on boat trips, have lunch and dinner dates. At first, there wasn't too much attention on us. The odd reporter would snap our pictures from a distance, and we would end up somewhere near the back of a tabloid. But then overnight, our outings became a hot topic. It had gone somewhat viral online, and now wherever we went, we were followed by a horde of journalists and fans. People around the globe were talking about us. They are the most beautiful couple. They're so stunning. I can't imagine what they'll be like all grown up. A genius and a princess. It's like something from a fairy tale. They're so young and yet engaged. I thought arranged marriages ended years ago. They're both rich and gorgeous, and they're not even a decade old yet, and they're in love. Life isn't fair. Young love. People were fascinated. The fact that we were in an arranged marriage, that we were both different races, that Anastasia was technically royalty, that I was a genius. There were many reasons for us to hold the public's curiosity. Anastasia loved it. She would go out of her way to wave at people and flash around a pretty smile. She had never received so much attention before, and I could tell it was getting to her head. I, on the other hand, was annoyed. I had wanted to go somewhere a bit more interesting. There was a Golden Hoof outpost here in Austria that I had wanted to visit, but those plans had been dashed. Due to all the reporters, we had extra security. It wasn't just myself, Anastasia, and Minho, but a bunch of people monitoring our movement. I felt trapped. We walked into Café Am Hof and the staff greeted us excitedly. One of the workers noticed how Anastasia and I were holding hands and excitedly muttered "aw" to one of her colleagues. I fought the urge to roll my eyes. I flashed a pretty grin. We booked a table for two. I heard a few oohs and ahs, and people smiled at us fondly. "Of course," said the waitress at the very front. "Let me take you to your table." She escorted us to a more private and secluded seat upstairs. I made a show of politely pulling out Anastasia's seat for her before sitting down myself. I heard other people seated much further from us remark, "Such a little gentleman. I heard he was a very polite and kind boy." I inwardly smiled. Doing small things like that to maintain my good image was tiring, but well worth the effort in the long run. Anastasia seemed to notice my glee at hearing that comment and smirked at me. "You're such a narcissist." I took my seat and sneered at her. "I doubt you even know what narcissist means." She crossed her arms in annoyance. "I'm 8, not 5. I know what a narcissist is. My English is just as good as yours, and Auntie has me taking Korean classes now, so soon I'll be fluent in that too." I nodded. I didn't really care. While Anastasia bragged about her language skills, I glanced out the window and noticed the crowd of onlookers slowly dispersing, although some did linger, and the press lurked around at the entrance. I then looked at the entourage around us. There was Minho and the 8 bodyguards that belonged to the House of Romanov. You know, I already know some Korean words. Anastasia was still going on, unaware that I wasn't listening. Hey, I interrupted her. Let's get out of here. Huh? I chose this place for a reason. Their toilets here are connected to an emergency exit that leads to the back of this place. Let's both go separately and use the exit to meet outside. Anastasia shrugged. Why though? What's the point? It will just cause the guards to panic, and I'm having fun now. I laughed. Whoa, you're so boring. I thought you were going to play with me. Oh, I tugged at the collar of my turtleneck. Did I show everyone what you did to me? Although the bruises had somewhat faded, I still had an ugly purple mark there. Anastasia's face had been turning red with anger, but when she saw my expression and the gesture I made to my neck, she became more obedient. You better show me a good time. I simply grinned at her and then turned to Minho, announcing loudly, I need to go to the bathroom. I quickly got up and left, mouthing to Anastasia silently as I went. You better come as well, or else. She pouted, but I knew she would follow my instruction. As Minho took me to the toilet, I said, I'll be leaving soon with Anastasia as planned. He nodded. I will text you to update you on our location. Make sure to keep the guards occupied and lead them in the opposite direction of wherever we are. I'll be sure to call you to pick us up before 5 p.m. You really need to do this? I gave Minho a piercing look. I hated it when he questioned my actions, but I didn't reprimand him, since I knew he was talking from a place of concern. This is our last full day here, before I travel back to Korea. After that, I won't be able to see Anastasia for a long time. I want her to remember me. I want us to have some fun alone without everyone watching us. I gave Minho a pitiful look. As expected, he easily gave in. Then I expect to see both of you back by 5. If I don't get an update every 30 minutes, I will assume the worst and come after you immediately. I nodded. Understandable. After that conversation, Minho waited outside of the toilets while I walked past the stalls and towards the fire exit. Before long, I was behind the cafe on Schulhof Street. I went behind some bins and found a duffel bag that I had made Minho pack and hide there the day before. I looked around, just like I thought. This place was a blind spot. No cameras at all. I opened the backpack to see it filled with 2 black padded jackets, 2 black caps, and 2 pairs of children's black plimsolls. Quickly put them on. Wow, you definitely planned this out. Were you that bored being with our security? Although I did find them a bit tiresome as well, so I don't blame you. I looked back at Anastasia and threw the duffel at her. Put these on. We don't have long before they realize we're gone. Anastasia's small nose wrinkled at the clothing items. These are so not cute, he complained, but still wore them. She threw her boots into the back and put on the plimsolls. You even knew my size. I guess you are a genius. I rolled my eyes at her. You're only just noticing now? Narcissist, she stuck out her tongue. I didn't bother responding to her comment as I grabbed her hand and led her down the street. It was now time for fun. The Goldenes Quartier is a really expensive shopping area in Vienna. Chapter 41. Cute Couple 3. We went all the way around and walked past the reporters that were still staring at the cafe like vultures. So where are we going? Somewhere fun? You're not going to tell me? You will see. This was both a journey to let off some steam and for me to test Anastasia. I had gotten a glimpse of Anastasia's true nature before, but I couldn't be sure of it. I needed to make certain that she had it in her to be an accomplice of mine, to be a confidant that I could trust, someone I could really play with. I was expecting somewhere interesting, but a park, really? Anastasia looked around with disappointment. We really were in a park filled with a variety of people and children, all going about their day. This is just the first destination. Are we really here to just play? We're here to find a playmate. Anastasia looked at me in confusion. We're here to find someone else to play with? We're here to hunt some good prey. Pick anyone. Whoever you choose will be our prey for the day. I wasn't sure how much Anastasia understood, but she gave me a mischievous look and began to look around the park. I sat down on a bench as she wandered around. She would stop to talk to a few children and play with them, and just as I felt excitement, Thinking she would pick that individual, she changed her mind and went elsewhere. Where are you now? A text came in from Min Ho. I typed back, we are at Volksgarten. No need to worry. Okay, keep me updated. As that text came through, Anastasia was suddenly in front of me with an older, middle-aged looking man. He had long, greasy hair and a stained shirt. I would have thought he was homeless if it weren't for the latest iPhone being in his hands and the Rolex around his wrist. Is this your friend? The man asked in German. He gave me an oddly excited look while he softly bit his bottom lip. She told me you got separated from your parents and need someone to take you to the police station. Don't worry, I'm a good guy. I noticed Anastasia hiding behind the man's leg. She gave me a devious smile. I found myself fighting the urge to laugh out loud. Every time I thought I understood her, she surprised me. I gave the man my most innocent expression. I'm not sure. My mom told me not to go with strangers. The greasy man crouched down to my height. I'm not a stranger. I'm your friend. You can call me John. Your friend, John. I smiled happily at him. Okay, John. Thank you for your help. It's no problem at all, he said with a sickening grin as he escorted us out of the park. The police station was around the corner, but as I expected, this man didn't take us that way. Instead, he led us to his worn-out black van. The car was parked in a suspicious alley between two old buildings that seemed vacant. There were no cameras, and it was in an area that not many people would walk past. This was clearly not John's first rodeo. He gave us an overbearingly friendly smile. Come on inside. I'll drive you straight to the station. I walked up to John and tugged on his jeans. What is it, little guy? Crouched towards me, and I leant forwards as if to whisper into his ear. Huh. He suddenly withdrew from me. He stumbled on his feet as he held onto his neck and pulled out the syringe I had expertly inserted. What? It's gamma-hydroxybutyric acid, I said. Liquid ecstasy, or better known as a date rape drug. I had my butler prepare it for me before I came out. John stared at me in confusion as if he couldn't understand my words. He swayed and tried to lunge towards me, but he quickly tripped on his feet and fell to the ground with a thud. He uselessly clawed at the floor, trying to crawl towards his car. You know, the more you move, the faster the drug circulates in your blood. Plus, I gave you enough to knock out at least 3 grown adults. While it normally takes 15 minutes for this drug to kick in, I tripled the dosage to make sure you won't be awake for much longer. And he's asleep. John had stopped moving altogether. Well then, do you want to play with him here, or should we move to another location? I looked towards Anastasia, expecting her to be shocked, but instead there was a large and ominous smile on her face. Here, now, why should we wait? Her enthusiasm clearly matched my own. I was both taken aback and delighted. You're right, why should we wait? This location is pretty ideal. I opened the duffel bag and I took out disposable white plastic paint coveralls, gloves, a hair bonnet, and a face mask. I then handed the same items to Anastasia. I had been planning on calling a contact I have at the Golden Hoof outpost here in Austria and having them pick us up and take us to a fun playroom there. Golden Hoof? You'll get to know it one day. We don't need to go there now, since we have a pretty good location here. I took out a plastic bag and collected the syringe. I then took out some nail clippers and antiseptic wipes and began to wipe John's hands and arms before I clipped his nails all the way back, even ripping off a few of them in the process. What are you doing? Anastasia peeked over my shoulder curiously. Getting rid of any traces of us. Watch carefully. Always make sure to clean your victim. The dirtier they are, the harder it is to spot any mistakes. They should be like a new canvas. If you're ever feeling impulsive, make sure to always have some gloves, a face mask, wipes, and some clippers. The gloves prevent fingerprints. The mask prevents any of your saliva or DNA from falling on the corpse. The wipes, hair bonnet, coveralls, and clippers are for the same reasons. I looked back at Anastasia, half expecting her to be distracted and looking elsewhere, but she was actually listening intently, taking in all my words with a level of patience that she hadn't displayed before. I smiled and began rifling through his jacket until I found his car key. I unlocked it, walked up to the back, and slid open the doors of the van. I switched on the light, only to see a scene that generally surprised me. The whole back of the vehicle had been converted into a weird sex chamber. There was a soiled mattress with cuffs and chains and other restraints, along with a variety of sex toys. The windows were tinted and one way, so you couldn't see in from the outside. Along the roof of the vehicle were dozens of photos of young boys and girls. I smirked and went back to his body. Help me carry him into the back. Even though she was wearing a face mask, I could tell that Anastasia was pouting. He looks heavy, though, she moaned, but she still complied. Being in a child's body wasn't easy. We both struggled for a while to haul him into the back of the van. We did it eventually. Now what? Anastasia panted as she stared at John, who was all sprawled out on the mattress. Now is the time for the real fun. Chapter 42. A Brutal Scene. 1. Disclaimer: this chapter includes torture and detailed descriptions of murder, which may make some listeners feel uncomfortable. There were a variety of tools in John's van. Anastasia easily found some cuffs and leg restraints to bind his limbs. While she put them on him, I found some scissors and started cutting through his clothing and tossing them aside. I then started to cut away at his hair. Judging from the containers filled with hair strands in the van, it seemed like he had a hobby of collecting his victim's hair, so it would be fitting if I scalped. What should I do? Anastasia asked as she watched me snip away at John's greasy locks. Do whatever you want, but don't leave any traces of yourself. How do I know if I'm leaving any traces? I rolled my eyes, but I had to consider her age. I'll clean it up for you afterwards and teach you some things. Anastasia nodded. I thought she was going to ask more annoying questions, but she surprisingly got on with it. Without much provocation, she picked up a hammer from John's tools and began smashing his toes. I heard the delightful sound of flesh being pounded and bones crunching as she crushed his feet. Every time she hit him, she gasped with joy. Curious sounds came out of her mouth. At first, she was a bit cautious, but with each hit, I could hear her become more hyper and confident. While she did that, I took one of John's knives and began to scalp him. 2 hours later. I'm hungry, Anastasia complained. We'll go out for some McDonald's when we rejoin Minho and the guards. But let's finish up here. I started taking Polaroid pictures with John's camera. As it flashed and a new photo got printed, a groan came from John. Wow, he's up faster than I thought he would be. I thought we'd have to kill him while he was unconscious. This is great, commented. John's gaze was hazy, but they quickly became alert. He tried to struggle, but then he noticed how his limbs were restrained and how his feet and hands had been crushed. He tried to scream, but his teeth had been pulled out and his tongue had been cut off. At that point, all he could do was cry. Thick tears fell from his eyes and heartfelt groans filled the van. I could just tell he was begging us for mercy. Anastasia burst out laughing. I'm sorry, she said between the giggles. His face is so stupid. It was true. His face was very comical. The lack of teeth and the fresh bleeding gums combined with the wagging stump that used to be his tongue. He was also scalped. Parts of his skull were exposed to air. All his hair was gone since we had thoroughly shaved him. We had also carved the words, pedo, onto his forehead and across his chest. It was stupid. Anastasia's laughter was infectious. Soon I found myself giggling with her, and we spent a good minute laughing at him. Eventually, I stopped laughing because it was making my sides hurt. Put the camera down and I picked up the knife. You know, I really wanted to do this while you were alive and awake, I said to him. I then proceeded to cut off John's little Johnny. He screamed as much as he could, which just came out as muffled groans. His limbs shook, but he was helpless. You weren't really working with much, were you? I sneered as I shoved the dismembered limb down his throat. Okay then. I turned to Anastasia and handed the knife into her gloved hands. You can do the final honors. Ah, she looked at me with confusion. Final honors. You're going to kill him. Kill him? She stared at me with a shocked expression. Well, obviously. What did you think we were doing here? Playing with him. He is a bad man and we were teaching him a lesson. We don't need to take it any further than this. I sighed. She had been doing so well, but she was still a child and she was drawing a moral line. Anastasia, the lesson isn't the point. Nor does it matter that he's a bad man. We came to kill someone today. But that's... That's what we're going to do. I pressed the handle into her palm. But do you want him to remember you? Think about all the trouble you'll get in if he stays alive. What if he tells someone about us? John began moaning and shaking his head, as if to say, I won't tell anyone. Ignore him. He will tell someone, and when he does, they'll put you away. When they put you away, you'll never be able to have fun like this again. And think about Auntie. She'll be very disappointed in you. But I know you're not worried about the act of killing. You're itching to do it. I know you. What you're worried about is the consequences. But use your brain. Obviously, killing him will get rid of the consequences. Anastasia paused. I could see her mind whirring as she mulled it over. It didn't take long before she walked up to John. She stood over him, and he whimpered underneath her in sheer terror. She hesitated for a bit, but then she stabbed him in the chest. She pulled out the knife, and then did it again and again and again. A large grin was plastered on her face the whole time. As I watched her, I realized that one day I would definitely need to get rid of her. I felt both thrilled and intimidated. When she finished, she had stabbed John a total of 16 times, and he was pretty lifeless by that point. Tiredly, she left the knife in his chest and picked up the camera. I observed her as she snapped more photos of him, flung them around his corpse, threw the camera aside, and then turned to me. Let's go back now, I'm hungry. I agreed. Before we left, I swept the scene. Everything relating to us was put in my plastic disposable bag. We had been careful, and all the torture weapons belonged to John, so I left the tools. It was a messy, but overall evidence-free job. We hopped out of the van. I put our blood-covered coveralls, masks, bonnets, and gloves into the duffel, and we changed back into our padded black jackets and caps. We then walked off out of the alley, leaving behind John and the black van. Considering the location, it would be a while before John was found. In less than a minute, we were on the main street. I texted Min-ho our location, and it took him barely 2 minutes to come in a black BMW and pick us up. He must have been nearby. Did you have fun? Min-ho asked as we climbed inside, and I handed him the duffel bag. Tons, didn't we? Yep, a lot of fun. Anastasia giggled, and then leant on her seat. She seemed to be in a bit of a daze. Make sure to burn that bag and all its contents before our flight tomorrow. Of course, young master. Min-ho to the team, the princess and the young master have been found. They were at the park. Over, he said into the radio. A voice came back saying, That's brilliant. Let's rendezvous at the agreed meeting point. Actually, can we get McDonald's first? Anastasia and I are hungry. I interrupted. Min-ho nodded and said to the radio, The children are hungry and want some McDonald's. I will be stopping at a drive-thru first. The comm went silent for a bit before an exasperated, Okay, I'm back. Chapter 43. A Brutal Scene, 2. The next morning, cameras were flashing while Anastasia and I hugged at the entrance of the airport whilst waving at our fans. Nearby, I heard an Austrian reporter say, I am Finn Miller, and this is the 10 o'clock news on Das Erste. I'm here at Vienna International Airport as thousands of fans of the young aristocratic couple, Hokang and Princess Anastasia, gather to say goodbye to Hokang. He will soon be returning to South Korea and continuing his studies there. While the House of Romanov announced plans to do many cordial visits to South Korea, and the young couple stay in contact. Who knows when Hokang will be back in Austria? It leaves many of their Austrian fans who have had the privilege of watching the couple in Vienna over the last few weeks, feeling heartbroken. Now let's talk to one young fan about why they're so crazy about this couple. The young fan in question was a teenage girl wearing a shirt that said Hona in big pink letters. She was carrying a large homemade sign that was decorated with the words, Ich liebe dich. What's your name? Hi, I'm Mary West. She gave a large goofy smile, and her pink braces gleamed in the sunshine. You're the leader of the Hona fan club. Could you tell me what Hona means and why you're so obsessed with this young aristocratic couple? Why do you think they have become a worldwide phenomenon? Yes, well, Hona is their ship name. It's Ho from Hokang combined with Na from Anastasia Romanov. It's their couple name. Finn professionally smiled and nodded. She continued, You know, I too, a few months ago, never thought I'd be a fan of two children. especially a young rich couple in an arranged marriage. I'm normally very much against old systems like that. I dislike elitists and the monarchy, and I hate the class systems. I normally see people being obsessed with royal couples, and I think, what? It's so stupid. Royalty is more irrelevant than ever these days. These people are only popular because they're rich. Mary's face turned a slight pink as she spoke loudly. When I saw on the news that 2 children as young as 8 were getting engaged, I was outraged. I thought shame on their parents, using their children for diplomacy in 2011. Ridiculous. I searched things up about them out of anger, fully prepared to hate watch, but then I was just amazed. What amazed you? Finn asked. He seemed generally curious. Firstly, Kang is a genius. I saw videos of his musical performances and read articles about him, and I became fascinated. Then the union itself also stunned me. I mean, the House of Romanov is no longer in power, but they still used to be royal. As rich and intelligent as Kang is, he is still technically a commoner like me and you. Nobles love to keep it in the family, all of them marrying their cousins and whatnot. This type of engagement is really breaking class barriers. I mean, I'm sure both parties, the adults, are getting something out of this, but it's groundbreaking. Not to mention, Kang is Asian. I mean, the Romanovs are Russian, and technically also Asian, but when was the last time that you saw an interracial royal couple? It's not that common, and if there is such a couple, they're usually vilified in the press. But who can criticize a genius like Kang? A torrent of words streamed out of Mary's mouth, and she walked closer to the camera as she spoke more passionately. Then he is so polite, he treats Anastasia with such courtesy, and they are both such beautiful children. I mean beautiful. So very gorgeous, stunning individuals, like they both won at getting good genes. They're living a life that you and I will never be able to understand. And I just find it fascinating. And I think that's why the world is also fascinated. And you can also feel the chemistry between these two. They really like each other. It's weird, but it makes me believe in love. Do you also feel like crying along with some other fans? Crying? No, they're dramatic. It's a shame to see Kang leave because the people have become so attached to seeing them here, but they will continue on. Obviously, he will come back. His fiancée lives here, for crying out loud. People crying over this need help. Finn laughed and then asked, do you have a message for Kang and Princess Anastasia in case they see this interview later? She practically jumped. Yes. I want to say that I wish them peace, prosperity, and I hope they can prove that love lasts and is real. I want them to be happy and an enduring couple like the Queen of England and Prince Philip. Finn nodded and was just about to comment on this when something came through on his earpiece. Quickly turned to the camera and made a somber expression. This happy scene is interrupted as news breaks that the infamous Cager, the serial child murderer, has finally been stopped. The killer has finally been identified as John Kramer from Renbonweg. For a whole year now, John has made parents fear, letting out their children into the streets of Vienna as he claimed 20 victims across the city. While his capture causes much relief, the circumstances surrounding his discovery is causing tensions to rise. I will now cut to reporter Julian Schneider, who is at the scene. Cameraman made a few hand signs and then said, "Cut." The moment the camera stopped rolling, Finn hurriedly looked at his phone, exclaiming, "Oh, what a brutal scene." At the same time, the whole atmosphere of the airport seemed to change. People quickly looked at their phones and began chatting amongst themselves, some gasping in horror at the gruesome photos circulating online. "Going on?" Anastasia asked one of her bodyguards, noticing that people had stopped cheering for us. "Some awful things on the news, Your Highness. You don't need to know about such things," bodyguard whispered back. Later on, she found out that the man we murdered, John, had been discovered earlier that day, and it was all over the news. For many people in Austria, it was a shocking event. Vienna was known as a very peaceful city with a safety index of around 75%. It wasn't known for crime. This horrifying pedophile that was roaming the streets was the worst thing they had seen in decades and had been haunting the people. But now, even though he was captured, they had a murderer on their hands. I had thought it would take longer for his body to be found, that John was discovered by one of his customers. John made money by selling the photos of his victims on the dark web, and on the side, he also sold heroin. 2 hours before the news came out, an addict named Dennis, who was a regular customer, wandered into the alley where the van was parked. He knocked and was surprised when no one answered, as he knew John practically lived in his van. Pulled at the door, and interestingly, it was unlocked and easily opened. At that moment, flies burst around him, and the smell of decay quickly followed. Since it was warm in the vehicle, John's decomposition had hastened, and Dennis was greeted by the sickening sight of a body covered in maggots. In disbelief, he took photos and posted them on his social media, asking his friends if he was tripping or if it was real. The photos quickly went viral online, and people began reporting the pictures to the police. Dennis tried to run for it, but he was caught by the authorities. And that's how the crime scene had gone viral, and images of our murder soon filled the mobile screens of everyone in the city. While people read about this news in horror, wondering who could have killed the man, I went to board my plane. Anastasia hugged me one more time before I went. I loudly said for all the listening ears, "I'll write to you, I promise," while I whispered in her ear, "Now we have a secret, and I have all the evidence, so if you don't want to get in trouble, be a good girl until we meet again." There was a hint of defiance and annoyance in her eyes. She still nodded. I didn't trust Anastasia, but I knew she was tightly in my grasp. We were bound together by a secret now, and I knew she had enjoyed all the things we had done. She wanted to do it again with me. She would need to be obedient. Chapter 44, Bonding 1. The flight back to South Korea in our private jet was dull and uneventful. Kong Sung seemed tired, and he slept the entire time. While Minho had a pensive expression, he stared blankly at the window for nearly the whole 10-hour flight. He only moved to escort me to the bathroom or to test and taste my food. But even then, he was like a zombie, moving automatically while his brain focused on something else. It bothered me. He had been dissociating like that since the morning. Actually, perhaps it started after he saw the news about the murder of John Kramer. Minho's silence made me feel unsettled, the same way you feel when your favorite toy stops working. I had put so much time and effort into crafting Minho into my personal dog. He was proof of my success in manipulating the human mind. If he started having issues, I would take it as a personal offense. I wanted to question him and get to the bottom of his mood, but we were within earshot of Kong Seng, his secretary and bodyguard, and other staff members on the private flight. I had my own room to sleep in on board, but it would have looked strange to others if Minho followed me in there, and the walls were thin. In the end, I gave up on the notion of talking to him on the plane. Ended up falling asleep. They played music by Ludovico Einaudi on the flight. Lent and his soulful piano drifted into my dream. I felt tranquil. I was floating on top of the clouds. First, I was alone, but then there was someone with me. I couldn't clearly make out their face, and I wasn't aware of when they appeared, but they had large black wings that spanned the length of the whole cloud. They spoke to me, but I couldn't quite hear their words. For some reason, I was happy and laughing with them. Crawled closer and reached to touch one of their wings out of curiosity. But then I began to feel like Icarus. The sun appeared much closer. My back became hot, and the cloud underneath me suddenly dissipated. Unable to grab anything, I was falling and, "We've landed, young master. It's time to leave the plane." Minho gently woke me up. My face was flushed, and I felt a cold sweat envelop my body. Where was this fear coming from? Why did I feel so anxious, like my heart was about to explode from my chest? Death didn't scare, nor did people. Yet there was something off, something I was missing. Was I getting too comfortable? Was I soaring too near to the sun? Who was that person? Maybe that dream was a warning to be more careful. If something is too good to be true, it usually is. Life had become too convenient for me. I needed to put my guard up. Falling for a false sense of security is what ruins people. "Are you okay?" Minho asked. "You seem a bit flushed." He touched my forehead. "But you don't have a fever." "I'm just very hot," I lied with a sweet smile. When I left the plane, emerging from arrivals with Kong Sung and the others, hordes of people were there to greet me. I was shocked as hundreds of cameras flashed, bright lights beaming in my face. There were fans who held up signs, shouting for my attention. Reporters screamed my name, hurtling questions about my engagement. I even noticed a few broadcasters, a KBS and SBS news reporter talking about my return to Korea. I wondered who would be watching the news at 3 a.m. Then again, they would probably repeat the footage at a later time slot. Thankfully, our security was good, and many of them were waiting for us at the airport. They held back the large crowd while we exited and walked towards our cars. Kang Sung giggled. Well, that was a rush, but I'm not surprised. You're a little celebrity. I was going to cheekily reply to that comment, but then I noticed Kang Sung sharply look ahead with an annoyed frown. I turned up to see what had happened, and soon enough, we were both wearing the same expression. Dunti. Kang Sung raised a brow when he saw my father standing in front of our limousine. What are you doing here? Why am I seeing your wretched face? It's been more than 6 years since you left. I thought you had run away to waste your days in the Caribbean. Junki immediately got on his knees. Fakest tears I had ever seen before spilt from his eyes. You're right, Dad. I've made so many mistakes. That was irresponsible of me. I wasn't feeling well after what happened to Yeonmyeon, and I needed to escape it all, but I've finally got my head straight again. I'm back for good now, Dad. I rolled my eyes. It was clearly all bullshit. Junki might have felt a bit of guilt about what happened to Yeonmyeon, but it was obvious that he ran away to avoid the bad press and his falling reputation. He probably also wanted to avoid dealing with Yeon Bon-hwa. There was only one reason a useless coward like him would come home. He got into trouble, and he had run out of money. Kang Sung let out a long and tired sigh. I wanted him to kick Kang Junki to the curb and leave him behind, but unfortunately, everyone knew that Kang Sung had a soft spot for his son. With a deep groan, he simply said, "We'll talk back at the estate." To Junki, that was clearly a green light, and he smiled brightly. "I missed you, Dad," and he looked at me. "I missed you too, little guy." He reached out to touch me, but I hid behind Kang Sung's legs and gave him a scared look. "Who are you? Who is he, Grandpa?" Junki made a comically shocked face, and Kang Sung sniggered. The other staff members and bodyguards present, who were very much aware of the family situation, struggled to hold in their laughter. "You don't remember me?" "Why would he remember you, Junki?" Kang Sung sneered. "My little Ho may be a genius, but you were never in his life. Is he expected to remember a man he hasn't seen or heard of since he was barely a year old? You reap what you sow." I continued to give Junki a confused and fearful expression, and I enjoyed the look of anguish that this created on his face. Chapter 45. Bonding 2. Kang Sung sneered at Junki as he proceeded to pick me up and walk past him. I thought he was going to leave without another word, but after climbing into the car, Sung glanced back. "It just so happens that the Kang family fundraiser event starts at 6 today. Although, I'm sure you already knew that, since my secretary sends you an invite every year. Since you've returned, you should show your face and try to rebuild your reputation." Junki's complex expression turned calculative and smug. He gave an understanding smirk and bowed towards the car. "I'll be there, and I will greet the family and our guests with you. I won't let you down, Dad." He made a small heart sign with his fingers. In response, Sung simply squinted at him, rolled up his window, and signaled the driver, and we drove off, leaving Junki standing at an empty bay. In the car, Kang Sung turned to me with a knowing look. "You're a once-in-a-lifetime genius with an eidetic memory, and you don't recognize your own father?" Corner of my lip curled up, and I laughed cutely. "You caught me." Sung cackled loudly and patted me fondly on the head. "Exactly. Treat him that way. If he can pick and choose when to act like a father, you can pick and choose when to act as his son." His palm rested on my shoulder, and he gave a weary sigh. "You probably think I'm too soft on Junki, and you're right. It's a bad habit. I spoiled him a lot as a child, and I really failed when it came to raising him. I wish he had even half the brain that you do." Gazed out the window with a distant expression. "You've never met your uncle before, but he was my first son and the previous heir. He was a brilliant child. Everyone loved him. He wanted to pursue medicine instead of business, and outwardly that looked great to the press, so I didn't stop him from studying. I assumed after some years of being a doctor, he would go back to his place by my side as the next family head. But then he went on to marry the daughter of the Song medical group, which normally I would welcome, but he married into her family and threw away his surname and the Kang family along with it. On his wedding day, he shamed me in front of everyone there, saying he didn't want anything to do with Kang Meng and called me a pitiable, ugly, and evil little man. He cursed me, saying that my sins would catch up to me. I realized then that I had misjudged him. He didn't have the ruthlessness or tenacity to lead the family. I disowned him that day. I nodded at Sung's words, pretending I didn't already know bits of this story already. At that point, Junki was the only eligible heir, but I had pampered him because I pinned all my hope on his brother, and as a result, he grew up foolishly. However, Junki had ambition. Unlike his brother, he had the balls to try to be the heir. I thought it wouldn't be too hard to shape him into the perfect family head. At least that's what I thought, until he ran away just because of Yongmyung's accident, proving to the whole family that he was pathetic trash. Now, you're my only hope. If you weren't around, those vultures would have snapped up all the power I'd spent decades building and forced me into early retirement, leaving our Nam faction in the dust. You have not only cemented yourself as heir, you have elevated our reputation and prestige to new heights at only the age of 8. You're a good boy. Grandpa is depending on you. He looked at me with a tender and expectant gaze. It made a complex sensation well up inside my gut. I didn't know how I felt about all this responsibility. I had fond feelings towards Kang Seng, perhaps because I had never had a real parental figure in my previous life. I liked Seng. He was like a pet I could keep around, but all his expectations were burdensome. I disliked it for 2 reasons. Firstly, I felt like a puppet. I was doing what I wanted to do, but by abiding by Kang Seng's whims, I had become a dog on a leash. I didn't like living by someone else's rules, and it made me want to get rid of him. But I knew that would bring about all kinds of problems that I didn't need. Secondly, just as I had feared, due to my position as heir and Sung's expectations, I was being heavily monitored by everyone. The press, competitors, family, everyone was watching me. It made enjoying my hobbies so much harder. Some point, I had become a lion in a zoo, a predator in a cage made into simple entertainment. I needed to take the heat off. I needed to break out of the cage, and I had a few ideas on how I could do this. Arriving back at the estate was an interesting event. Despite being so early that the sun had yet to rise, there were crowds of servants surrounding the gates and even family members, including Madame Kang, awaiting us at the entrance. Our car rolled in, ushered by deafening cheers. "Welcome back, young master. We're glad you had a safe trip, young master." "We love you, young master. You have to tell us all about the princess." "Welcome back." I could see signs that read, "We love you, Kang Ho, and thank you for coming back safely." This greeting was far more impressive than the one we had gotten at the airport. It felt good to see the results of my hard work. Despite my absence, the affection that members of the Kang estate held for me was stronger than ever. The moment I climbed out of the car, I was whisked into the embrace of Madame Kang. She held me in her arms as she spun around. "I missed you, little one. Trip this time was too long." I laughed and said in my sweetest voice, "I missed you too, Grandma." After Yongmyung's accident, I had become the golden child of the Kang family and the only possible heir for the Nam faction. Quickly, this caused Madame Kang's attitude towards me to change immensely. I was now her sweet cherub, and she openly showered me with affection and treated me preciously. She was desperate to stay in my good graces and probably thought I didn't remember her previous hatred. One day, later in her life, Madame Kang would experience the consequences of her previous rudeness, but that was further into the future. At this moment, I enjoyed her pandering towards me. "Look at you. You've gotten more handsome. You have to tell me all the details of your latest trip and how you met the princess," she cooed. "Ah, Young," Song called to Madame Kang as he climbed out of the car. "We've had a long flight and it's early. Let's have the servants put Kang Ho to bed. He'll need the rest and energy for the fundraising event this evening." Of course. Madame Kang smiled sheepishly and put me down. My sweet cherub. She pinched me softly on the cheek. We will catch up later. Your grandpa is right. You should go and get some sleep. I gave her a beaming smile. Okay, how mayoni? This caused an expected amount of awe so cute to come from the onlookers. Immediately Minho was beside me. I will escort the young master to his room, he said plainly before picking me up and walking swiftly away. As we left, several servants waved, "Sleep well, young master." I greeted them back, making sure to say each of their names. "Good night, Mary. Sleep well, Chaebol." As I said this, I heard the servants squeal louder. I can't believe he remembers me after so long. Of course he remembers all of us. He's a genius and a kind young master. Hearing these compliments made me smile at them charmingly. I continued to wave my goodbyes as Minho turned a corner, and that's when I noticed movement at a few windows belonging to the guest building. My eyes met with one of the silent onlookers at the window, and I gave them a warm smile while they sneered at me. Chapter 46. Bonding. Brie. It seems like some guests are already here for the fundraiser, I muttered. Minho glanced behind us and noticed a few shadowed figures peeping through the windows of the guest building we had just passed. He agreed. Seems so. His lazy response made me frown. What is the problem? I asked as he sat me down in a nearby golf cart and began adjusting my seatbelt. There's a problem? He asked awkwardly. That reply made me frown deeper. Perhaps my experiment was failing. I had been so careful with Minho, but that carefulness was the issue. I should have made him a rabid dog and controlled him through his bloodlust and anger, but instead I chose the route that maintained more of his sanity so that he could work as my hands and feet. I made my innocent facade the focal point of his obsession and protectiveness with me. Perhaps the event in Austria had made him see through my tactics and peer into a sliver of my truth. My mind raced with doubts, and I wondered how I would dispose of Minho, and if I even should do that, considering how much I needed him currently. Clearly, you have a problem with me, I said slowly. We haven't spoken properly since we left Austria, and you've been avoiding eye contact some time now. Minho visibly squirmed in his seat. As he started to drive and turned the wheel, his eyes shifted with panic. He didn't answer immediately, but then he spoke, quietly, with his eyes still turned towards the winding big roads. I feel bad because I have failed you. Failed me, how? I didn't protect your innocence and left you and the young lady in danger. You both could have been that pedophile's next victims, all because I didn't look after you properly. Oh, so that was it. That's not your fault. You were only following my orders. Anastasia and I were fine. Just because you ended up fine doesn't mean I didn't fail as your protector. The car rolled to a halt, and he turned to me. You got your hands dirty when it's my job to get my hands dirty for you. I noticed an obsessive and strained look in his brown eyes. You're the only family I have, the only person that treats me like a person, and I swore to protect you, yet I can't do my job. Every day I see you falling deeper into depravity. These days I hear your twisted words that only I should be saying. He held my shoulders with shaking hands. I have failed to protect your innocence. I almost gagged due to his sincerity. I wanted to tell him that I had always been depraved and there was no innocence to protect. That would shatter his illusion. I put on the most pitiful expression I could muster. My bottom lip quivered as my eyes became slightly red and watery. Truthfully, I was scared when that man came after me, Anastasia. And every day it gets harder because I do bad things and I'm becoming more like Grandpa, and I hurt people. My shoulders trembled. And the worst part is I like doing those bad things. I can't stop myself. Minho sighed. I wish I could take on all your sins. I wish you were my real son, and I could protect you properly from your awful grandfather and the disturbing company. I wish that too, I mumbled, and then stared him straight in the eye as I gripped the hands that held my shoulders. But you can't protect me. Since I am the current heir, I will continue to walk down the gray and dark path that my grandfather has set for me. Since you can't be my protector, you must be my sword. We should paint our hands red together. We should bear the same sins, and you should help me as I get rid of all those who disturb my path. If you can be my sword, we will both be happy. Minho winced at my words, and I could see the conflict of his mind on his face, but soon he looked at me resolutely. I have failed as your protector, but I promise to do better as your sword. I am another limb belonging to you, and I will help you slaughter those that need to be slaughtered, young master. The corners of my lips twitched upwards, and I hugged Minho. No need to call me young master. Just call me Ho. Even if you're not my biological father, you're the only dad I've ever had. Janu. I mean Ho. You're the only son I've ever had as well. I hid my wide and ugly grin in his shirt as we continued to hug. This mutt was so pathetic. I thought he had seen through me, but instead, he had fallen further. Is this what you call bonding? Several hours later. Expensive luxury cars rolled into the estate. Reporters flashed their cameras at the entrance as they tried to get pictures of those who had been invited to the exclusive Kang family fundraiser. The entire grounds had transformed for the fundraiser. A long, winding red carpet was laid across the paths, traveling from the entrance all the way to the diamond hall where the event was being held. Lanterns hung from terraces of each building, illuminating the carpet, gorgeous floral arrangements and art that were displayed at every turn. All the working servants were dressed in traditional hanbok uniforms, wearing the Kang family colors: green, white, red, and yellow. Since the Nam faction was in control, green was the main color of their outfit. I stood near the entrance of the Diamond Hall with Sung. We greeted the guests together, engaging in small talk and strengthening our relationships before letting them enter. Hello, Kang-ho. It's been a while. Do you remember me? Tall and pretty girl with black-green eyes and dyed red hair stood before us. She looked about 15 to 16 years old, and she had a very calm demeanor. I quickly realized that she was Mung Bei, the granddaughter of the current head of the Mung family. To confirm my thoughts, I noticed her grandfather, Mung Do-hin, and the heir of the Mung family, Mung Bei's father, Mung Byung-ho, approaching us from the red carpet. Since I was home tutored, and I had been on many trips with Kang Sung, and due to the age gap between myself and Mung Bei, I hadn't seen her since my daljabi. Immediately I greeted her with a practiced grin. It has been a long time. You came to my daljabi, didn't you? Lovely to see you again. Mung Bei stared at me with wide eyes, and Mung Do-yun let out a loud laugh. Honestly, Sung, how do you get used to being around such a genius? I guess it's true that he never forgets anything he sees. He really can remember a person he met at barely a year old. How intriguing. Kang Sung joined in with Mung Do-hyun's laughter. It's really great. I don't forget anything with him by my side, and he really keeps me on my toes. The men chatted briefly about business and the date of the next group meeting, all the while Mung Bei awkwardly stared in my direction, not really knowing what to say. I simply smiled at her, but I didn't initiate any conversation. I wasn't going to engage in annoying small talk if I didn't have to. The next series of guests were a mixture of big business moguls, politicians, important Kang and Mung family members, and even A-list Korean celebrities. One woman, I had never met before, appeared just as Sing and I were about to leave the guest greeting to the servants. She had long, wavy black hair that reached her waist. She wore a gorgeous body-fitting dress that exposed her slender back and clung to her curves, leaving a lot and yet so little to the imagination. She had cat-like eyes and was, by all means, an extremely stunning woman. By her side was an equally handsome man. He was in fact a celebrity. I had seen him on film posters and billboards, and he was a known heartthrob. If I remembered correctly, his name was Park Do-hoon. The moment Kang Sung saw her, he frowned. You've been staying in the guest house since yesterday, yet you're only arriving at the event at this time, Haikyo? She laughed. Sorry, Dad, she shrugged. You should be grateful I'm here at all. All your other kids didn't bother. As she said that, I heard a voice say, What do you mean no one else bothered? Aren't I here? Kang Jun-ti popped up behind Kang Haikyo with a cheesy grin. Hi, Nuna. She rolled her eyes. Chapter 47. Murder Mystery. 1. Kang Haikyo's pretty face contorted with repulsion. She glared at Jun-ti like he was dog shit on the back of her shoe. I was so happy when I heard you fled abroad. I thought I wouldn't have to see your rotten face ever again, but here you are ruining my day. Her words dripped with callousness. "Nice to see you too, Nuna." Junti greeted her warmly, his wide grin and smiling closed eyes hiding his true feelings. She continued to scowl at him. I wasn't surprised by her anger, considering their relationship. Kang Seng had 5 children in total. The son he had disowned, 3 daughters, and Junti, who was the youngest of the lot. Kang Hae-kyo was the younger of the 3 daughters, only 2 years older than my father. Since the pair of siblings were close in age, Junti and Hae-kyo had always had a rough rivalry, and their relationship only soured further when Junti replaced his older brother as heir. That was because Hae-kyo had wanted that position. While her sisters had gotten married and quietly distanced themselves from the family, Kang Hae-kyo had ambition. She wanted power and influence, and to be acknowledged in the Kang group. She set up Kyo Entertainment in her late teens, a company that was now one of the top 5 biggest entertainment agencies in South Korea. Many popular artists, groups, and actors were under her management. Hae-kyo was known for her quick wit, beauty, and business acumen. There were many people that rightfully thought she was much better than Junki and deserved to be the heir. But she was a woman, an inferior being in Kang Sun's older eyes, and to the misogynistic and old-fashioned crones that governed both the Kang and Mung family, she would never be an option. She wasn't mentioned in the novel, but I knew a lot about her through rumors and stories floating around the Kang household. I also knew that she hated me. When Junti ran off, she finally thought she could claim the position of heir, but then a child, not even a decade old, was put ahead of her. Rumor has it, she went into a violent rage when she learnt this, smashing many expensive vases and breaking mirrors in a hotel penthouse suite. Junki ignored Hae-kyo's scowl and instead turned to the handsome man next to her. "If it isn't Park Do-hum, I saw your last movie. It was brilliant. I can't believe you're still dating my sister. It's been 15 years already. Don't you ever get tired? Since you love her so much, do me a favor. Marry her and make her stop all her nonsense. She should be making you some babies, not grabbing for things that don't belong to her. Don't you think so?" Park Do-hum had a pretty and bright smile, which remained on his face while his eyes became icier the longer Junki spoke. "Hello, it's been a while. And yes, I still am with Hae-kyo. Unlike you, I know how to treat a woman well and be loyal to her. I don't run off like a dog when they're on hospital beds." That comment cracked Junki's playful act, and his expression quickly grew dark. He looked like he wanted to punch Park Do-hum, but he held himself back as he turned towards me. He crouched down to my height and gave me an awkward hug. "Hello, little one. Your dad is here." I stared at him blankly, but I didn't resist his hug. "I'll make sure you don't forget me from now on," whispered. He then jumped back to his feet and turned towards Kang Sun with another calculative look. "Hi, father. Sorry for being late. I brought a +1, a friend of mine. Someone I'm sure you would love to talk to." He gestured behind him, and a small old woman approached us. The woman seemed to appear from nowhere. I normally prided myself on my keen senses, but I didn't notice her until Junki pointed her out. Perhaps it was due to her small build, but she had very little presence. She gazed at us all with warm almond-shaped eyes, and when her sights fell on me, her small lips curled upwards, and a wry Cheshire grin brightly shone out. She was pretty in an unassuming and plain way. There was nothing really striking or unique about her, yet for some reason I found her strangely familiar, even though I was sure we hadn't met before. "This is the wife of oil tycoon Saket Day, Miss Harin. I met the couple while I was in Dubai, and a little birdie told me that you've been looking into oil more and more these days. I'm sure you'd love to have a chat with her dad." Kang Sun's expression didn't outwardly change, but I had a feeling he was pleased with Junki's actions, especially when he smiled warmly at Harin and extended his arm towards her. "Pleasure to meet you. Let's have a chat while we head inside." She smiled brightly and accepted his arm, and they began to walk and discuss business. Seeing this, Kang Hae-kyo scowled even more deeply, in a way that was somehow made seductive by her gorgeous face. Without another word, she then held on to Park Do-hum's hand and strutted into the diamond hall. The whole time she didn't greet me or even bother to glance in my direction. Once they were gone, Junki smiled tentatively and extended his hand. "Let's walk in together." he said. Minho, who was never too far from my side, silently appeared behind me. His hanbok fluttered slightly in the night breeze, and the gat on his head made him appear rather handsome and imposing. He was about to pick me up, but he paused when he saw Junki's extended hand. I hesitated. I found Junki unpleasant, and I almost knocked his hand aside, but I was curious about how he planned to play this game. How would he repair his reputation after being gone for so long? Curiosity outweighed my annoyance, and I accepted his offer. Minho stepped back as I took Junki's hand, and we walked into the Diamond Hall together. Chapter 48, Murder Mystery 2. The Diamond Hall, like its name, was shaped like a diamond. Luxuries and lavish furnishings decorated each of its 4 tall walls. It was the size of a royal ballroom. The floor was made of Calacatta marble and crystal diamond-shaped panels. The domed roof was made of diamond-shaped glass panes that gave a clear view of the moonlit sky and evening stars. The walls were made with gold paneling and inlaid with real 4-carat diamonds. The wallpaper was illustrated with silk threads and studded with small diamonds and crystals every centimeter. Just one patch of that wallpaper would be enough to feed a country. Sometimes even I had to marvel at the sheer wealth the Kang family had accumulated over the centuries. I would only be able to see the family treasury when I became the head, but I was sure it would be even more impressive than this room. A place like this was made and used for only one reason: to show off. Many of the guests danced in the large center whilst an orchestra played on the stage, and our staff, dressed in hanbok, served drinks and food. For all his faults, I had to admire how thick-skinned Junki was. The moment we entered the hall together, all eyes were on him. Conversation halted, and whispers filled with mockery spread like wildfire. Yet through all the insidious words and callous laughter, Kang Junki stood tall. He navigated the crowd and the circles like a true insider, greeting everyone he came across whether he knew them well or not. He used me craftily as a tool in his hands. No one wanted to speak ill of him or make a bad impression in front of his genius child, who never forgot a face or a word spoken. So most of his conversations went well, forced smiles and fake politeness. Junki was also quite silver-tongued and, dare I say, charming. Soon enough, he had garnered quite a crowd around him, and many people were enjoying his company. However, for me, the novelty of Junki's thick skin quickly grew boring. All he was doing was small talk and ass-kissing. I thought it would be more fun, but I remembered that this was all he was capable of. Boring people came up with boring solutions, and for a spoilt, trust-fund child who only knew how to use the people around him, networking was all he amounted to. I tugged his arm while he was exchanging some fake laughter with the Minister of Health. Glanced down at me with surprise. "What's up?" "I'm feeling a little tired. I'm going to sit with Minho for a bit." As I said that, Minho appeared before me like a spirit I had summoned. He stepped out so silently that Junki audibly gasped, "Is your manny a ninja?" This sent a ripple of laughter through the small group of people he was standing with. Quickly regained his composure. "Yes, go rest. You've been very good. Dad will come to look for you soon." I was dismissed. He didn't even give a second glance as Minho picked me up, and we walked across the hall. "As usual, he's a piece of shit," Minho muttered. "I wish I could scalp him and leave his exposed skull in the fields to be feasted on by crows." A wry laugh made my lips twitch upwards. "That's not a bad idea, but I have bigger plans. In a few years, he will be wishing for death." I expected Minho to laugh or reply in some way, but instead he was silent. I glanced at him only to realize he was distractedly gazing at the woman Junki had brought to the fundraiser. I was confused until a light flickered in my head. That strange sense of familiarity from Miss Harin finally became clear. She looked a bit like Minho. They had similarly shaped eyes, although Minho was more striking appearance-wise. They shared the same ambience. They must be related. "Who is she to you? You look similar." Minho's expression became bitter. "My mother. She's my biological mother." "I see." I nodded quietly. Minho had mentioned his family situation to me before. Though that was the woman that had forgotten about her son, or rather, she simply didn't care about him. There are people that see their children as appliances rather than individuals. Once that tool becomes inconvenient to them, or no longer fit for the purpose they have in mind, they toss it aside. Beating it, ignoring it, and even killing it. Reproduction at its core is egotistical and narcissistic. Children are a form of wish fulfillment, and even parents with the best intentions are using their children for some means. Minho was simply a tool that was tossed aside. Perhaps his mother did hold some love for him, but her life was easier without him, and so she neither searched for him, nor did she bother to recognize or reach out to him. An action that was louder than any words. "Do you want to kill her?" Minho froze at my question. He didn't even blink as he thought deeply, but then a minute later he shook his head. When someone is murdered, people close to them and their relatives are always suspected first. It wouldn't take long for officers to uncover our connection. Plus, she is a wealthy woman with many people that love her. Even if I got rid of her body properly, someone would still intensely look for her if she goes missing. It would be troublesome. The only people I need to kill are the ones you want to kill, so the real question is, do you want to kill her? If you do, I can go through that trouble? His answer made me happy. I had to fight the urge to giggle. He clearly wanted to kill her, but he was self-aware of the consequences of his actions and the steps he would need to take, and he was also well aware that he belonged to me. His will didn't matter. My will was what mattered. I smirked and shook my head. For the moment, we shouldn't toy with her, but it's not completely off the table. I'll let you have your fun soon. Not today. Minho gave me a warm look filled with affection, and he was about to say something, but then we were interrupted by a silky voice. If it isn't my two favorite people, long time no see. It was Sang-min. His hair had become more silver over the years, but everything else about him was the same, including those hungry pale eyes. You haven't contacted me in years, but I know your little pet has been working closely with Golden Hoof, even outsourcing some of our workers for some private projects. He leant close to my ear. A little birdie even told me about a playroom you have somewhere. Won't you let me in on the fun? Sang-min was smiling smugly until he leaned back and saw my expression. My usual poker face momentarily fell, and for a split second he saw my rage. At that moment, the desire to plunge my nails into his eyes and bite off his nose filled every inch of my being. But a second later, I was back to my more innocent facade. I gave the purest look I could muster while I said, "It seems like Minho will need to start exterminating some little birdies soon. My playroom and private projects shouldn't be reaching your ears, as you see." Minho immediately apologized. I got rid of all the workers that knew the exact location of the playroom, but it seems I should have gotten rid of them all. I apologize, young master. No rumors should have spread. As long as you know what you need to do. I glanced at Sang-min. I'm sure Golden Hoof won't care about some more of their expendable lackeys going missing, right? Sang-min seemed slightly startled, but he quickly went back to his confident self. Well, Golden Hoof doesn't need workers that mindlessly chat. Feel free to do what you want. I won't stop you. I laughed childishly. Well, whether you stopped me or not, I would have done it anyway. Sang-min squinted and then also laughed. You've gotten even more adorable than the last time I saw you. Such a shame that you're not my son. Well, if you're cooperative and stay out of my business, I might just call you Dad one day, Juicy. Sang-min smirked and then made a wide bow. Well, I hope that day comes, young master. He then stood straight and left. Enjoy your evening.